A reading from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 24. Now on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things took place." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near to the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on, but they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it's almost evening and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road, and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
I don't know about y'all, but I've been doing a lot of walking lately. The first walk of the day begins around 11 a.m. and goes for about 2 miles or so, sometimes a little bit further. And then the second walk of the day begins around 3 p.m. and goes for another 2 miles. I'm just walking to walk. I have no destination on my walks. No matter if I go on a shorter walk or a longer walk, if I change up my route, even if I intentionally go down a road where I don't know where it will lead, I always end up right back at home. Because I have nowhere to go. And it's not just that I have nowhere to go, it's that I can't go anywhere. The only places I can go are my front yard, my backyard, my couch, and the store about every 2 weeks. My walks have become a form of waiting. I'm walking and I'm waiting. Walking and waiting, walking and waiting, day in and day out. I'm waiting to have a destination again, to see friends again, to go eat at a restaurant so I don't have to do any more dishes. I'm even waiting to hug people. And if you know me well, you know that hugs aren't exactly my favorite thing, so you know that that's a pretty big deal. I'm also waiting to gather here in the sanctuary with all of you again. I'm just waiting. And I imagine that all of you are too. It feels like we're stuck in what Dr. Seuss calls the waiting place in the book, Oh, the Places You'll Go, which is kind of a rude title for a book to have right now. But Dr. Seuss says the waiting place for people just waiting for a train to go or a bus to come or a plane to go or the mail to come or the rain to go or the phone to ring or the snow to snow, or waiting around for a yes or no, or waiting for their hair to grow. Everyone is just waiting. We're all just waiting. The two men on the road to Emmaus were also just waiting, walking and waiting. It was Easter evening, and they had heard the good news from the women who had seen the empty tomb. Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Peter had run to the tomb and confirmed that it was indeed empty. So, where was Jesus? The men were walking with a destination, Emmaus, but it seems like a pretty hopeless walk. Why is Emmaus significant? Other than being 7 miles from Jerusalem, we don't know much about it. So it seems to me that this is nothing more than a waiting walk. Yes, there is a destination, but this is a walk for waiting. Waiting to find out where exactly Jesus is. Waiting to see Jesus so they could know if it was really true, if he really had risen from the dead. As they are walking and talking and waiting, Jesus himself walks up. And the text tells us that their eyes were kept from recognizing him. We don't know if their eyes were kept from recognizing Jesus by some divine power, or if they were just too overwhelmed and preoccupied from the events of the last few days. For whatever reason, though, they couldn't tell that it was Jesus. But it's not just that they couldn't tell that the man walking with them on the road was their friend Jesus. It also seems that they couldn't tell who Jesus actually was. When Jesus asks them what they are discussing, and they begin to tell him about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet. A prophet? Were they not paying attention? While the two men on the road are not thought to be members of the 12 disciples, they were likely part of Jesus' extended group of followers. They had seen the miracles he had performed, and they had heard Jesus foretell his death and resurrection no less than 3 times. How could they believe Jesus was just a prophet and not the Son of God? The men allude to knowing that Jesus had said he would be raised on the 3rd day. However, even though they had heard the witness of the women and Peter, they still don't seem to believe. So Jesus, ever the teacher, begins to explain to them everything that was said about him in the scriptures. He opens the scriptures to them, causing their hearts to burn within them, as they later say. So why couldn't they see him? Were they just not paying attention? Paying attention can be tricky, especially today. We never really have to pay attention or see anything around us because it's become pretty normal to stay glued to the smartphone in our pocket. Or, right now, it's really easy to only pay attention to COVID-19 news coverage and forget that there are other things that deserve our attention. The past 5 Wednesdays, myself and other Wilshire folks have gotten together over a Zoom call to discuss Barbara Brown Taylor's An Altar in the World. The book is all about being open to the divine presence and discovering the divine presence all around us through spiritual practices that may at first seem a bit mundane. One of the spiritual practices Taylor writes about is paying attention. She spends a whole chapter and then some talking about this spiritual practice. At the heart of the spiritual practice of paying attention is reverence. Reverence is the recognition of something greater than the self, something that is beyond human creation or control, that transcends full human understanding. What most often hinders reverence or paying attention is the self. We get in our own way, and we forget to look upon each other and the world around us with reverence. And we miss things. Taylor writes that when you pay attention to the world around you, even the smallest of things so small as a single peppercorn, you learn to see God. You learn how God pays attention to the very smallest of things and to you. You just have to make sure you don't get in your own way so you don't miss it. I wonder if part of the reason the men on the road to Emmaus didn't recognize their friend Jesus and didn't recognize Jesus as the Son of God was because they had gotten in their own way. Their hearts were burning within them and they didn't even notice. Their bodies were trying to tell them the Son of God was walking with them and they ignored it. We would do well to listen to our bodies and the things our bodies try to tell us. Thankfully, as the men's walk is coming to an end, their bodies told them they were tired and they were hungry. And the men listened to their bodies. They reached Emmaus and they invited the stranger on the road with them to sit and rest and eat with them. And since the men didn't seem to be able to grasp who Jesus is, he decides to make it blatantly obvious. Jesus takes the bread, blesses it, breaks it, and gives it to them, just as he had a few nights earlier. And it wasn't until Jesus gives each of them the bread that their eyes were opened, and they realized who was sitting with them. I wonder if when Jesus gave them the bread, he called them by name. I wonder if this is what opened up their eyes. I wonder if Jesus said, "Here, Cleopas, take this bread." And I wonder if that was the moment that Cleopas knew it was Jesus sitting across from him, just as Mary Magdalene knew it was Jesus the moment he said her name in the garden by the tomb in John's Gospel. There's power in calling someone by name. There is power in being called by name and being known. It's the human condition to miss things, to not pay attention. Fortunately, when we do miss it, we have a Savior who knows us, who sits down with us to blatantly reveal himself and call our attention by name. After Jesus reveals himself, he immediately disappears. The men realize how they hadn't paid attention. They realize he had given them signs as to who he was, and they just couldn't see it. But now, they have seen it. They have seen the risen Lord, and they have to share this good news. They have to get back on the road again. They have to get back on the road to get to Jerusalem to see their friends there and tell them that Jesus is risen. He is risen indeed. Friends, right now, it seems that we're just waiting. We are walking on the road to Emmaus and waiting for Jesus to come and meet us. We are waiting to be reunited, to worship together in person, to hug, and we're waiting to dine together at Christ's table again. We are walking and waiting, waiting and walking. But the good news is that on our own road to Emmaus, to a destination that isn't really a destination, in our waiting and in our walking, the risen Lord meets us there. Even if we aren't paying attention, Jesus still meets us there. It may not be how we expect him to meet us. It may even take us a while to open our eyes and pay attention. But Jesus is always there, walking, waiting, and journeying with us until we can break bread together again. And until we can get back on the road again to go and see our friends and tell each other that Jesus is risen. He is risen indeed. Amen.